Hello and welcome everyone to our series on the Exalted Treatise. We're continuing to explore the third section of the Exalted Treatise, which looks at things that we should avoid in terms of our actions, thoughts, and words. The first line that we'll explore today is this one, states to be disordered when drinking alcohol. The point here is that there is a fondness for alcohol, and it's different from just having one or two drinks. This is when the fondness for alcohol causes one to have contrary behavior or disordered conduct. So that's why there's this disorderliness here. And I guess many of you will know that from a religious point of view, drinking alcohol is actually not permitted in many of the faith traditions, for example, in Buddhism or Islam faith. From the perspective of Buddhism, this is because drinking alcohol can affect our judgment, and to the extent that it stops us from being able to abide by other precepts that we should keep as part of our Buddhist practice. There are extenuating circumstances, or we could say special circumstances, in which case you can drink alcohol. As a Buddhist, for example, as part of medicine, in cooking, or when one is quite elderly and you need to drink alcohol for health, so for blood circulation. This kind of from the perspective of traditional Chinese medicine. So that's not to say that alcohol is strictly forbidden, but there are certain special circumstances. You'll note, of course, that in these circumstances, none of them involve getting drunk. So the point of then drinking alcohol is not to get drunk, nor does it cause a dependency. Does it cause kind of alcohol addiction? Well, that's from the religious point of view. What about from the social point of view? And it's very interesting because we find ourselves in societies, there are many societies around the world which have a drinking culture, for example, in the UK or Australia. And what I mean by this drinking culture is that drinking alcohol is very prevalent. Drinking alcohol occurs in celebrations, in commiseration, or simply, after work to unwind with colleagues. Even though, of course, the legal age for being able to buy alcohol is 18 years of age in both the UK and in Australia. We hear of how even in high school, young adults are already starting to drink, let alone in university. So, for example, I stayed in university accommodation, and there's a huge drinking culture in the sense that this is probably the first time that people have moved out of home. They're young, trying to experiment and understand the limits of their body, the limits of their comfort zones, but also we're not just talking about university, which has this clubbing or partying kind of culture, but also later in our work careers, Friday night drinks, when you just have to go socializing with colleagues or friends. So that's what I mean by this drinking culture, that it's just a part of everyday life. To the extent that you feel that perhaps it's so prevalent, you've probably heard these statements, the following statements. And my question to you is, are these statements actually true? Right? If you're in this kind of environment where this is, for example, after work, and people say, oh, a few drinks won't do you any harm. Have a few drinks to help you relax. And if you try to say you don't want to, then they'll just say, well, everyone's drinking. What's wrong with that? So what do you think? Are these statements true? what I hope to explore with you is each of these statements today. We'll just, the literature is immense on alcohol and its consumption from a personal perspective, from a societal perspective. But I think that it's important just to understand the key points because it might not only help yourself, but help friends. And you can explain these things to them. So the first is a few drinks won't do you any harm. Interestingly, the harm and the consequences of alcohol are well documented in the Chinese literature. And we're talking not just, a few years ago, we're talking about even thousands of years ago in the sense. So the collected commentaries has a whole list of over 30 kind of issues or disadvantages, you could say, of drinking. And we're talking about drinking on a sort of long-term, perspective in the sense that it becomes a drinking habit. Okay, so you can see from this list, there are short-term problems, long-term problems, personal problems, interpersonal problems, family, work relations, etc. All areas of one's life can be affected by this drinking habit. And I think, from what I will explore with you today is perhaps related to the individual, okay? Because I think the other kind of problems you can read about in your own time, but I'll look at it from a health perspective. So interestingly, alcohol is not digested in the same way as our food. When you drink alcohol, it immediately passes into your bloodstream, gets absorbed into your bloodstream. And it travels throughout the body. And that's why, after you have a drink, you can get breath tested and it will show that you have had a drink. And that's because this is how alcohol is absorbed. Now, when it travels throughout the body, it actually affects our various organs, like our brain, our lungs, liver, kidneys, etc. The very first organ that it does actually affect is our brain. And it affects the part of the brain that controls how our body functions. So what I mean by that is in terms of the physical functions, for example, how our heart beats, how our vision, etc. But also it works on our self-control, and it clouds our judgment. So it works on those parts of the brain as well, and even affects our mood. So you can see it has, in the very short-term way, an immediate consequence is the physical effects, mental, so cognitive, as well as emotional. So, during this period, of course, you could say the drinking period when you're actually drinking alcohol, because it affects your judgment, it can lead to high risk behaviors, things like drink driving, and but I'm sure that most of you are aware of this, the short-term effects like the hangovers, etc., that friends might complain about. But beyond this, there are also very interesting long-term effects. It's quite interesting, but people don't really realize that alcoholic drinks are high in calories. Okay, so a pint of beer is about the same number of calories as the standard size of pizza or half a cheeseburger. And that's why people who consume a lot of beer, they will get a beer belly because it's high in calories. And you might say, well, what about wine? Well, a large glass of wine is probably the same amount of calories as an ice cream sundae. So this is interesting because people will have their meal, you'll have your dinner, and then you'll go out and then you'll consume more calories, liquid calories, through your alcohol. So it's actually very easy to put on weight by drinking, and particularly the sort of the drinking habits that you have when you're young, there's binge drinking. When you consume large amounts of alcohol, then of course that's going to add to your body weight. So that is something that is beyond the immediate drinking period that sort of, you would say, harms the body. And the effect of alcohol is so well known that people call it slow suicide. That liquor is slow suicide, because what it does is, when you drink this over a long period of time, but we're not saying you have to drink it every day. It could be sort of bouts of drinking, every week or that sort of thing. And what it does is it actually pickles the brain as well as the liver, which you can see here is highlighted in red on this rotating animation. But basically, that's what I want to focus on, because it's actually the liver that breaks down the alcohol. So when we talk about the liver, it's this organ on the right upper part of our abdomen, okay? And what it does is that it sort of removes toxins from our body, helps with our metabolism, produces things like blood clotting factors, does a lot of things that are very important for the whole function of the body. And one of these things that does the idea of removing toxins is breaking down the alcohol that we put into our system. Now, this is what normal liver cells look like under the microscope. Okay? And you'll notice that there are a lot of dots, right? Dark purple sort of dots, because of the staining that's been put onto this slide. But basically, each of those dots is a liver cell. And that's what normal liver cells actually look like. Now, when we drink alcohol, even one drink, as alcohol filters through our liver cells will die, because it has to remove these toxins. But some of the liver cells die, but the liver actually has the ability to regenerate its cells. So that's actually a good thing. Now, the important thing to note here is that, back to that question of, what about a few drinks won't cause any harm? Actually, drinking, let's say a few drinks over a few days, let's say you're going to a music festival, actually causes the buildup of fats in our liver. This is back to that concept that actually alcohol is very fatty. It's actually high in calories. So this will build up fats in the liver. And this is known as alcoholic fatty liver disease. And this is what it looks like under the microscope. You'll notice here in the second picture, there is still those sort of dark purple circles, but there are more of these white circles, aren't there? The white circles actually represent the fat cells, right? And this is a bit more blown up, but you can see that the fat cells amongst the more normal looking sort of liver cells. So it gets amongst your liver, and this is at a microscopic level, so it's actually throughout the liver. And this will occur just after a few days, this buildup. Now, this fatty liver is actually reversible. If you stop drinking, after 2 weeks, your liver will probably go back to the normal looking one on the left. But what happens if you don't stop drinking? If you continue to, what's a few more, few drinks on the Friday with friends, you don't realize that you have fatty liver because it's actually asymptomatic. But if you continue to consume over a long period of time, then what happens is that your liver will get damaged. It's what's called alcohol hepatitis. Hepatitis meaning inflammation of these liver cells. This could also be asymptomatic until it gets too late. Alcohol hepatitis is actually a very serious and life-threatening condition. And many people in the UK actually die from this condition every year. They don't realize it because they only get the symptoms when it's sort of too late. And, if you because you're asymptomatic, you continue to drink without realizing that you have this, fatty liver and then this hepatitis, then the very late stages of this liver, alcohol-related liver disease is what's called liver cirrhosis or hepatic cirrhosis. And it looks like that on the right. You'll notice that there are these sort of greenish blue lines, and that's what happens when the liver is trying to process this alcohol, but you're putting too much in. So it has to sort of set aside all its other tasks to just process, metabolize, get rid of this alcohol. And because it's working overdrive, then it damages itself. The liver gets damaged. These cells die, they get damaged. There's inflammation, there's scarring. So the blue-green sort of lines or areas is scarring inside this liver, this person's liver. And, in a medical school, you see pathology where who's died from alcohol cirrhosis. Their liver, what it looks like is it's very different from a normal liver. It's very nodular. It's shrunken because of all the scarring tissue, and it just looks abnormal. But you can also see here from under the microscope that it already looks abnormal. The so-called liver cells, in between the blue and green lines, actually also don't look as normal as the slide on the left, does it? So it's this, liver cirrhosis is when your liver stops working. All those other functions like metabolizing, helping you metabolize, removing toxins, creating clotting factors, etc. All of that stuff is not working anymore. And when it gets to this stage, it's irreversible. You can stop drinking alcohol at this stage when you realize, but the damage is already done. Stopping the drinking will mean that you don't get any more damage, but it's not going to repair itself. And actually, there is no medical treatment for this. In more severe cases, people need a liver transplant. But oftentimes the patients may die before they get a viable transplant. They'll die from other complications of, a liver that stopped working, and many, many other complications. So really, when you say to yourself, when people say to themselves that, a few drinks doesn't do any harm, the point is that will you actually stop after a few? Or will your judgment be so impaired that you don't care anymore? And then you wake up the following day with a hangover, but then after the hangover you think that everything's okay, but actually the damage inside your body is still is felt by your body. It may be reversible, it may be irreversible if you do this on a regular basis, but the damage is already done. The second sentence then is, well, drinking will help me relax. Feeling stressed, work problems, people problems, relationship problems, maybe I'll go have a drink. Does it actually help you relax? There's been quite a lot of research on this. In this particular website called DrinkAware, it's actually a UK charity that looks at research on drinking sensibly. And this is sort of, these next few slides are all from this website, but it's quite clear that actually alcohol makes stress worse. So stress, what it is, that feeling that we get of worry, you could say, that this kind of feeling that we're under pressure from something. Well, this is actually a normal reaction because it heightens our alertness to the circumstances, to the people around us, because we feel that we need that kind of heightened awareness and in certain environments or situations. Now, people will try different techniques, therapies to cure themselves of this stress, and interestingly, they will try alcohol, right? And alcohol is a depressant, yes. What it does, it acts on some what's called GABA chemicals in the brain. But actually, what it does is that, you might be feeling stressed, you might be feeling depressed. It actually makes it worse because you feel uninhibited with your emotions. You lack the self-control if you drink past the your limits, and in fact, it will make your mood worse. So if you're feeling depressed, it sometimes pushes you more. Yes, there may be this initial feeling of feeling relaxed, feeling happy, but if you continue, then in fact it makes it worse. On top of that, why is alcohol not a good cure for stress? Is because it affects your sleep. So it's been researched that alcohol will affect your rapid eye movement sleep, that deep form of sleeping that actually helps your body, relax and repairs the body, that sort of thing. That deep sleeping that makes you feel like you've got sleep, and alcohol reduces the amount of time this REM sleep, and therefore you wake up and you don't feel refreshed, and therefore this lack of sleep actually may worsen your stress. So that's why alcohol doesn't make stress any better. In fact, it makes it worse. What about anxiety? This idea that you're really worried about the future, you're really fearful. It could be that you may even start getting physical symptoms when you're anxious. Now, this is not an anxiety disorder, it's just feeling anxious in general. And therefore, people may turn to something like alcohol. Again, as we said before, alcohol is a depressant. And what it does in the initial few drinks is that it might make you feel more relaxed. You continue drinking because it's making you feel good. But then what happens is that it acts on these chemicals, and then you start to feel more anxious. If you stop drinking, you feel more anxious. Then you go for more, and then it's this vicious cycle. So you feel that you need more, and so on and so forth. And unfortunately, it's people who are in these states of anxiety, generally in their life, that they will turn to alcohol, and it becomes something that they become dependent on. Because the thing with alcohol, like other drugs, is that we develop tolerance, which means that you need more to feel the same effects over time. So if you constantly turn to alcohol, over time you need more of that. So you develop alcohol tolerance, which then quite quickly then it's a slippery slope to alcohol dependence or addiction. So that is this vicious cycle. So it can contribute more to your anxiety rather than relieve it. And then actually alcohol can contribute to panic attacks. So the thing is that, as we mentioned, it acts on your brain, these chemicals. It depletes the chemical, this GABA chemical, which helps you to feel relaxed. So it initially stimulates it, causing you to feel happy, but then later depletes it. Then you get panic attacks. So it's this double-edged sword in a way, because initially it makes you feel good, but then actually it's quite nasty later. So that's why alcohol, if we go back to this question, does it actually help you relax? And the answer is, from the research, no. It doesn't help your stress, it doesn't help your anxiety, it causes panic attacks, it makes you more anxious, and actually worsens your stress. And what about the idea that, everyone's doing it anyway? In 2019, there was research on over 2,000 adults, so, over the age of 18, because that's when you can drink alcohol. And, they found that there is this huge peer pressure to drink because of this culture. And over 1 out of 3 people reported that they went to these parties or events, functions, and they ended up drinking more than they intended more than they wanted. And because of this culture of having rounds, everyone's going to have a drink. Okay, let's get another round. So this is 1 over 1 in 3. It's quite substantial. And, again, over 1 in 3 adults felt that they couldn't refuse to drink with their friends or colleagues because they felt that saying no, refusing a drink would be impolite in this kind of crowd. And therefore, obviously it's no surprise that there's this pressure to drink, and it's common across the age groups. But when you hone down on the young adults, the 18 to 34-year-olds, the pressure, this report that there's pressure, rises to over 2/3. And I'm sure that you've experienced it if you've gone to these functions. So that's not really a surprising figure at all. So, is everyone drinking? Well, clearly, based on these figures, not everyone really wants to. And you wouldn't be alone, because the statistics show that 1 out of 7 adults in the UK, we're still looking at the UK statistics, actually don't drink. And half of those 1 in 7, half of those people said that they used to drink. So it's not that they've never drunk, but they actually used to, and they realize that they're better without. So you're definitely not alone if you choose not to. And that's, we all have to make informed decisions. When we know about the short-term consequences, the long-term consequences, and how we are able to, manage expectations, attend social functions, but also feel happy in that environment without feeling pressured. So then the next part is, well, how is it, if we are already drinking, maybe have this habit, how do we reduce it? How do we, express the idea that we don't want to? The first is always be confident in your choice. Okay, so you're informed. If someone says to you, a few drinks won't harm you, well, actually, you know that there is already this damage. And then if you are informed, then you're more likely to stick with your decision, stand by your decision. And whatever social function it is, you don't have to avoid these social functions, but you have to plan ahead, and sort of think about, okay, well, when I go there, how many am I going to have, or how am I going to say no, right? So that's the next point, which is, if you are not planning to have any alcoholic drinks, perhaps you could just sub for a lemonade or non-alcoholic drink. What if someone tries to buy you something alcoholic? There are a lot of different ways of saying no. In fact, for most, not say most, but a lot of Asians, Asian people may not have the enzyme to actually metabolize the alcohol. If you're someone like me, you might be only able to have a few sips, and then your whole face becomes red. It becomes very uncomfortable. So this is something that is a very legitimate reason that why would you want to start the night off feeling really uncomfortable because of the alcohol, when you could really enjoy the night with a non-alcoholic drink. So this is the thing, that you don't have to please everyone, because you're in your own body what you can or you can't handle, and it's other people that have to respect your decisions. After all, they're meant to be your colleagues, your friends, aren't they? So there are different ways. You say, thinking about my health, haven't been feeling too well lately, don't like the way drinking makes me feel, perhaps makes me feel uncomfortable, and then I don't enjoy my night. And I'm sure your friends and colleagues will back off, because they're there to support you at the end of the day. And then there's this idea of the importance of seeking like-minded individuals. The idea that you have to find friends and family who will respect and really support your decisions. And if you attend these functions, to attend them with your supporters. So if you plan on having a few drinks, that you can stop yourself, that there's someone there to help you if you have poor judgment. So that's the idea of seeking like-minded individuals. Certainly don't, if you're not planning on drinking, don't hang out with the heavy drinkers. And I guess the final thing is that if you want to reduce drinking or stop drinking, it's important to seek professional help if you have been drinking for some time. And this is, you can just see your GP, really. You don't have to book yourself into some addiction clinic or anything like that, or it's not very serious, but just to seek some medical advice. And this is important because if you have been having this regular consumption, that perhaps your body is actually, and your brain chemicals have already started to change. What we mentioned before, that your brain, your liver gets pickled over time. It's very interesting because I previously worked in an addictions medicine clinic, and you see it's not just alcohol but other sort of drugs. But even for alcohol, we would have patients come in who really wanted to quit. But because they'd been drinking for some time, the moment they quit, the hands start shaking. They can't concentrate. And it's actually quite dangerous. These alcohol withdrawal symptoms can be very life-threatening, fatal even. There's this condition called DT, or the DTs, the delirium tremors, in which case, these chronic alcohol consumers, if they suddenly stop cold turkey, they can actually, it's actually quite fatal. So if they wanted to quit, if they wanted to stop alcohol, and we're talking about, the people that we saw would be people who, the moment they wake up, they need a drink. And throughout the day, they have a few cups, if not bottles. And this is on a daily basis over, years now. So the moment that they stop, their body is certainly not used to it. Their brain, their body's shutting down. They're so used to this depressant effect of the alcohol that without the alcohol, they become hyperactive. The heart rate, they get feverish. They, as I said, start shaking. That's why it's called delirium tremens. They become delirious, hallucinate. Like there's things crawling on their skin, etc. So it's a very kind of serious condition, and that's when they stop. And in fact, they have to be prescribed sedatives in order to get through those initial days and be under medical supervision, attendance. They have to check themselves into a hospital or some sort of centre or clinic. So actually, getting professional advice, even just your GP, a GP would be able to help and direct you if we're talking about these kinds of people, or people that might need this kind of help. So it's important that you might not feel the symptoms now of this alcohol-related damage, but if you want to stop drinking, then you'd still need to seek some sort of help and reach out. It may even just be looking up stuff on the internet. There are a lot of, as I mentioned, a lot of literature on this because it's such a huge problem in society, and particularly in young people. Before I move on to the next topic, I want to also share with you a story from my university days. And this is something that I guess, every time I think about the effects of alcohol, it sort of brings me back to this story. As I mentioned, I was living at university in the university accommodation, one of the colleges. And, each college has their, college student society. And the president of another college. He was a law student. He's in his third. But when I was studying there, he was in his third year. Very popular guy, really nice person. But what happened was that, at the end of the year, kind of ball, you call it a formal, or you call it a ball, for the college ball, he had this tragic accident and passed away. And, the coroner looked through, investigated, and it was this very thorough report, which you can, it's open to the public to see. But basically what happened was that they sort of analysed how much he had drunk throughout the night. So, prior to even leaving the college, he had already had a beer with his mates. To get to the ballroom, the function, he took a ferry. They had 2 glasses of champagne. Got to the function, was at this hotel in the ballroom. But as they were waiting to get into the ballroom, he had, like 3 or 4 beers with his friends. When, throughout the evening in the party, he had about 13 jugs of beer, as well as glasses of red wine. And, after this event, people went their separate ways, but, they sort of said, oh, well, why don't we go back to the uni, to the football club and continue partying? So this is where everyone went. Now, it's not too clear where he was or who was with him in the night. But what happened was that some of because they all said they wanted to meet at the football club. And, some of his friends, as they were approaching the football club, they saw him face down, lying on the ground. And, they called out to him in response, turned him over. He started convulsing. They immediately started CPR, called the ambulance. The ambos came and also started, continued the CPR, but it was too late. And, the coroner's report was that they found that he had blood alcohol level 6 times over the limit of what you would be able to, the blood alcohol level for driving. So it was already 6 times over, not that he was driving. But they also found that he had a skull fracture, he had a head injury. And so they concluded that the cause of death was head injury from a fall because of alcohol intoxication. So if he did not have that much alcohol throughout the night, he would have been able to walk fine, make his way, to continue with his friends throughout the night. But because he had that level of alcohol, as I said, affected his judgment, but also affects you physically. For example, slur your words, you can't see properly, your legs, not walking in straight lines. And you can't really judge, might not be able to judge distances in the middle of the night, slip over something, hit your head. And unfortunately, no one was next to him at that time. Perhaps he'd already been lying there for some time. But it really sort of stays with me, the story, because, obviously I was there in the accommodation. I was not there at the party. And everyone knew him because he was really popular. He did a lot for the college, for the community, for the university. He was really bright. As I said, he was a law student, about to graduate. And, there was a funeral at the university, but everyone was just devastated. Obviously his family, his friends, but the whole university community, everyone at the colleges was just so shocked and sad that this person's great potential to do so much and had been doing so much at the university, but also could be doing so much more throughout the rest of his life. It was that his life ended so early, and it was entirely preventable. It was because there's no other reason except for the drinking. So it does sort of make you reflect on, a person who's intelligent, but they can be because of peer pressure or lack of judgment because they've already consumed quite a few drinks, that they can be pushed to those extremes, such a high blood alcohol limit, so many drinks throughout the night, and then to have that end to his life in such a tragic way, that it just does shock you, 21-year-old. So, the idea of drinking, yes, it is this culture that we have. It's very prevalent, but we also have to be well informed. We have to understand what we get ourselves into, and also, help others understand as well. I think that's the most important thing. So that's the first sentence. This being disordered when drinking alcohol, and the next sentence sort of goes into the family. And there's a whole cluster of sentences in the next part that we'll look at, which is about the family and the various roles in the family. Quarreling with family members is a misdeed. It's not good to get into arguments, but particularly with your loved ones, it's even worse. And I guess there's this potential to be more hurtful within the family because you know each other so well that any kind of argument just brings back all the past, all the things that you did to me in the past, all this past history gets dragged out. You start hurling accusations at each other, and it can be quite messy because you have this family history, and you know each other so well, and the consequences are that it just breaks apart the family. So this is why the focus on the family. So if we look at each of these words, the first, this bone and flesh, in the Chinese literally means of my bone and flesh, so of my family members, my family, my relatives. So it could include extended family as well, not just the nuclear family. And then to get angry with them and to fight with them. Now, this word for to contend with or fighting is actually quite interesting. So here on the right is how we write it, the script, the modern script. On the left is the small seal script, an ancient script written 2,000 years ago. And it's interesting because it shows two hands. Okay? There's a hand at the bottom, 3 fingers representing 5 fingers. A hand at the top, again, 3 fingers. And then this thing in the middle, which is meant to sort of represent what they're fighting over. And the closest picture I could find is this picture. But just imagine that there's only one cake or one donut, and they're both reaching for it. So there's this idea that you're both going for the same thing, that you're fighting over. And the fight or the contention, competition occurs, the argument occurs because you just want it for yourself. You're not thinking about the other person. And that's how, in the character, in the Chinese character, you can actually see this. And it doesn't just show you the quarrel or the argument, but it also shows you the cause of that argument. When you're fighting over 2 people wanting the one thing and you can't share it, you can't, see from the other person's perspective. So this character is actually quite interesting. Now, the thing with why there's, we've heard about family relationships in the past, for example, this idea of family reverence, caring for parents, etc. We've covered sentences in the past, but this one, the cluster of sentences that we will discuss, are related to this idea of the family and its roles. And it's important to understand why there's this focus on the family, because these days when we live with a nuclear family, so just the parents, the children, it's hard to imagine what it was like in the past and why this family was so important. I'll bring your mind back to one of the fundamental or foundational texts in the Confucian tradition, which is the highest learning. One of the so-called 4 books, which was core curriculum in late imperial China. So everyone who was studying would have to study this text. It's a very short text, but what it does is that it provides us with a framework of understanding the Chinese, this worldview, how they saw the world and how they saw the individuals, humans, relating to the world. So, this diagram was not in the original text, but basically through this diagram is what the text said. And it's the idea that right in the middle, at the bottom, is the self. And all those things that we talked about in the series of lectures is this idea of cultivating one's self, one's mind, particularly. And how we cultivate ourselves then leads to how the family. Now, this household is more than just the nuclear family. In the past, they had family clans, people with the same surname, living in the one area, in community. And the special thing about the family was that it was not just people living in close proximity, but actually it was an institution that the family would look after the elderly, the less able, the young, providing education. It was the family unit, the family clan that provided these sort of welfare services. What we might call social welfare these days was actually provided by the family, the extended family. And this would, the family would have regulations. They would be managed by, a committee of elders, you could say. So you can see that starting from the self, one's cultivation, it affects how we interact with the family, and also it affects the harmony of the family and how the family sort of comes together. If we think about the previous line, this alcohol consumption, we might think, well, it's just my own decision. But clearly there are consequences for my health, and also if I have risk-taking behaviors. If I say something wrong when I'm drunk, then perhaps relationships fall out. And this has an impact not just on yourself and your health, but on the family. If you're chronically, you're a chronic drinker, then you can't pin down a job, can you? So who's going to support you? In those days, it would have been this idea of the family. So the self impacts the family, which has these different responsibilities of looking after all its members from the welfare perspective, from the education perspective, from a sort of pastoral perspective, then is the foundation for a stable society. So the thing with these families is that it wasn't just about profit for oneself, that they would have this stability, look after its members, so that its members could then contribute to society. And that can only happen if they've got, good education, if they're well skilled, that they can contribute the knowledge and skills to the rest of the community. And this is what is known as ordering the state. So if the families in the state are well managed, harmonious, everyone is skilled, personal, professional development wise, then that family can contribute to the community and the state is stable, it's ordered. If the state is ordered without internal civil warfare, then this would have a greater chance for world peace. Because even if there's civil warfare, then other states, could be what we like, in the modern world where different nations take sides, even in a civil war. And therefore the world would be divided. So therefore, world peace, if we go from the outside to the inside, is dependent on the state being states being, well ordered, stable. Then the states depend on the families, which then depend on the individuals. And that's why this education, education of understanding our place in the world, understanding interpersonal relationships was so important. It was so important that the children this learning had to start from the child. Elementary education was all about, understanding our roles, our responsibilities within the greater family. So you have, the first book that children would read was often the three-character classic. And you have lines like this. While they're learning their vocabulary, they also learn that they're not just part of the family that they can see, their brothers, their sisters, their aunties and uncles, but actually they also have to think about their grandfather, their great-grandfather, their great-great-grandparents, and how it is that they can continue that legacy and how they can leave the world in a better place for their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, their great-great-grandchildren. So it's this family that's extended across time and space. Okay, so the space is, this extended family, but the time is the generational aspect of the family, that you are continuing this legacy and you are preserving it, transmitting it on for future, leaving the world in a better place for the future generations. And how you do that is by understanding all these various relations. So out of the 5 different relations, 3 are within the family. And if you break those down, ultimately there are 10 duties. And as it says here, they ought to be fulfilled one and all. No one can escape from these relationships, from these duties, from these roles. And if that's the case, then we just have to learn how to do it properly. Even, another primer talked about the importance of family prosperity. A year is planned in the spring. The idea that, the farming, sowing the seeds occurs in the springtime. Every day you think about how you're going to organize your day so no time is wasted. So it starts in the morning. Family's prosperity starts from its harmony, through its harmony, and the family's fortune is through a person's fortune, this individual person. How is it that we achieve our fortune is through diligence. So it's kind of very practical advice that, started from a very young age. And, you have these great exemplars in those texts, which talk about, how it is that we can get along with others. The Zhang family, 9 generations, over 900 members living together in harmony, was so well renowned that the emperor, the Tang emperor, Emperor Gaozong, was particularly curious. On the way back from his annual sacrifices at Mount Tai, he dropped in, had a personal visit to the Zhang family, and he asked them. Now, this is not something that happens every day, the emperor dropping by for a visit, but he wanted to know what was this key to harmony within this family that perhaps they could adopt on a national level. And Mr. Zhang, he didn't say anything. He just asked for his pen, his writing brush, and paper, and he wrote down one word. And he wrote it over 100 times. And on and on and on. This is not 100 times, but what does this word mean? And why was it the secret to his family's success? It is forbearance. It is this understanding that, in the family, everyone is different. We have to acknowledge and respect the differences of others. And at the same time, we have to accommodate them. It's too easy to focus on weaknesses, right? This person's not good for this, not good for that. But because, you often have contact with them. But what about their strengths? Focus on their strengths. And the little things, try to forgive and forget. And this is idea that, we have to accommodate others not hold grudges. Every day is a new day. In fact, every moment is a new moment. That, if you happen to have this argument, this quarrel, well, don't blame the other person, blame yourself, and try to see through it. So this is this idea of forbearance, and it was his secret. And, this story serves as an inspiration not only during the Tang Dynasty times, but also, throughout the generations, as this story was recorded in the literature. And Zhang Gongyi, he actually lived to a very long age, passed away just at the age of 99. So you see that this kind of value, these values, in the Exalted Treatise, we said it reads that we shouldn't quarrel with family members. But how is it that you can get to the point where you don't quarrel with others? It's easy to say this, isn't it? Avoid quarrels, avoid arguments. But how do you do that? That's the secret, isn't it? How is it that you can cultivate yourself, your ability, your resilience, your ability to think of others from others' perspective? Really try to use the whole scope of the learning in the Exalted Treatise to get you to the point where you are interacting with others, not just the family, but anyone even outside the family, and you don't get into arguments over very petty things. But even if it's major problems, to try to look at their perspective from their point of view, in their sort of version of reality, in their minds, and perhaps at that point, if it's not necessary to refute them, to debate with them, to argue with them, then you can sort of let it slide until another opportunity comes where there's a better moment where you can help them understand a different opinion. So this idea of quarreling with family members is actually a misdeed here. So these arguments we have are not innocent, particularly when it comes to if it involves more than one family member, that if it leads to family members separating, divisions in the family, then that is a cause for demerit, and therefore that's why this is listed as a misdeed. Okay, so given the time, we won't move on to the next sentences, but we'll continue this exploration of the family, the various misdeeds related to the family, and how we can have this greater awareness of what we need to do, our responsibilities, next week. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and look forward to seeing you next week.